I'd just like to start with some guidelines that we have here. Anyone who wishes to speak during public comments or on a particular item will be required to fill out a speaker slip. Speaker slips must be turned in to the secretary. Each request will cover one speaker. Those who wish to speak must submit their own request to be called on by the chairperson. There is a 3-minute limit per person. When written comments of any item may also be submitted to the secretary. Those who wish to speak on public or quasi-judicial hearing items will have 3 minutes for each item. All who wish to speak, including commissioners and staff, need to be recognized by the chairperson or vice chair before speaking. All documents for public review are on file with the city clerk's office, and the City of San Bernardino encourages the public to view this general plan advisory committee meeting on television or online. And with that, I'd like to call the meeting of the General Plan Advisory Committee for the City of San Bernardino call to order. And Mr. Wood, would you please lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance?
Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the GPAC meeting. I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening and all those who may be watching from home. We're going to cover several things for this evening's agenda, an updating meeting schedule, the draft land use plan, and recommendations to the draft of the land use plan. And with that, I'd like to welcome staff or Mr. Woody to introduce who's here and who's not here.
After what seems like a long summer vacation, it's a pleasure to be back with everybody here. And I was talking to Angela a few minutes ago, Angela, about how we missed the Halloween holiday, the Thanksgiving holiday, the Christmas holiday, the New Year's holiday, et cetera. So it's good to get back to everybody as well. I appreciate the effort everyone is making as well. Maybe, Dave, you can introduce city staff who's here tonight as well. Introduce who you are.
Sure. Good evening. Myself, I'm Dave Murray. I'm the city planner. I know I've met some of you, but not all of you at the last General Plan Advisory Committee meeting. Been with the city for about 8 months, just to introduce myself, and I'll allow Travis Martin to introduce himself.
All right, thank you. As Dave said, my name is Travis Martin. I'm associate planner here with the Planning Division, and yeah, I've been here about a decade. So,
Jessica.
Jessica Nemitz, Executive Assistant to the Director, the Secretary for GPAC.
Okay. Okay, Woody, would you like to give us an update?
Yeah, let me bring you up to date on our schedule, where we are here tonight, and this was attached to your to the meeting materials, but we've charted out a course of action to follow through in scheduling meetings to get us to having that point of having that draft, general plan for your review. Up on the screen is that schedule, and let me just point to you that actually our next meeting is scheduled in 2 weeks. So we have a really ambitious period of time. What we'll be doing following tonight's meeting is getting into the substance of the content of the general plan other than the land use plan. And what I mean by the content is we will be focusing on what we call the goals, policies, and implementation programs related to each of the chapters of the general plan that are ostensibly, in most cases, revisions and updates of your existing general plan elements to reflect current conditions, to reflect changing legislation since the existing documents were written, of which there have been substantial changes in legislation, as well as to make sure that they are reflective of where the community is today and where you, from where once were, things have changed, obviously, in the community. And so it's a reflection of that. So our next meeting, as you will see on the schedule, I don't know if right there, it does work. On April 3rd, we'll be distributing to you 3 elements. These are more or less technical elements, but they have a lot of, if you will, substantive issues associated with them, some of which significantly will be modified because of legislation, as well as will have significant impact upon the future of the community. The first of those is energy and water conservation. I think probably everybody is pretty aware of kind of the fundamental substantive changes to that particular element in your existing document. We are now addressing issues of climate change that we were not the last time this document was prepared, this section of the plan. And you will see some number of robust goals and policies and programs related for how we can move in the community of San Bernardino to a more, climate, if you will, basically addressing the issues of climate change as basically being resilient in the future as well. That's coupled with the safety element. The safety element is one of those elements under state law has had significant, if you will, changes. And where the changes there is for years, we, of course, knew about our earthquake faults, and we would have safety elements dealing with how we, if you will, respond to and resilient to things like earthquake shaking. And let me indicate that by definition also the safety element is not basically focusing on the safety to police services and crime, et cetera. The focus is on safety and protection from natural hazards and impacts from natural hazards themselves. So again, where the safety element has significant changes is we now have issues of potential increased wildfire risk than we had really acknowledged probably the last time this element was updated. We have concerns about flooding. I mean, we all know what's been happening the last few weeks within the state of California. Due to the intense periods of rainfall we have been having, and there are a number of other issues. So there you will find some substantial new material in the safety element. And the third section will be about the important historic resources that are in this city. A lot of those are, of course, in the downtown area, and indeed the goals and policies in this section of that you will see when these are distributed to you are basically growing out of the work that has been done for the downtown plan to make sure that's consistent with what has been done in the downtown plan, since there's been a focus on that about preserving that fabric of historic places in the downtown of the city of San Bernardino. So these elements will be distributed to you a week and a half in advance or so of our next meeting. You'll probably be receiving them by Wednesday next week, worst case Thursday, but I suspect hopefully getting them out to you by Wednesday. So you'll have them in plenty of time to take a look at, et cetera. We're giving you what we call a clean version, but we'll have online what we call, and what I mean by clean version is we have also a version that strike out and underline, which indicates how existing goals and policies may have been modified in the original language. So if a word is deleted, you will see a line through it, and where words are added, you will see it's underlined. Easy to do in our computers today. We have both available to you. We will post the original strikeout and underlines online as well. So if you want to access those, in addition to the clean, what I'll call the clean deletes all the changes. So it's just a clean version of it as well. So those will be coming to you in about the middle of next week for our meeting on April 3rd. And at that meeting, as we will in all of the future goals, policies, and implementation programs, is have a discussion with you about, are these truly reflective of the kind of directions that you're seeing, in particular for the city of San Bernardino? And are these, if you will, is there something missing of some concern that you might have that you think is a particular topic that needs to be addressed that's not in there? There are hundreds of policies in those 3 sections, so we're not going to go through them in detail. We'll organize it in the discussion by the basic goal statement, because the policies are all organized by goals, and have you a chance to, hopefully we'll have that a chance to read them and take a look at them as we move into that session as well. And just to remind you, I think we had this discussion very early in the process, and I will have a slide at the very beginning of the presentation on April 3rd that clearly reminds you what the definition of a goal and a policy and implementation program is, so we have indeed some clarity of understanding. But let me just very briefly, without having the slide tonight, just to remind ourselves that a goal is written as an end statement, so it's what you want to be. So like, we will have adequate affordable housing for everybody in the community. That's a goal. It doesn't tell you how you're going to get there, but it is basically a statement of what you want the end state to be. Or we will, under safety, we will have a safe community that avoids all the risks of natural hazards. You know, that, I don't even know if that's a goal in the safety section, but that's just an example of what it would be. The policy level then is how you are going to get to the goal. It's an action-oriented. It indicates that there's a commitment of the city to follow a particular direction to achieve that goal. So, for example, in the affordable housing, this is the easiest one. We've had the housing discussion here. The basic goal, for example, to achieve, if we have this goal of affordable housing, is we're going to zone sufficient land to provide housing for every income and every age level and et cetera, within the community, et cetera, sufficient acreage. And then the implementation program tells you how you are going to achieve that policy. So you will see in each one of these a table, and the table will list what the actual implementation action is. It will indicate who is responsible for carrying out that program and give you a general time frame for when that particular program will be achieved. So this is the real, what we call generally the guts of general plan documents, et cetera, and it's a very important piece, et cetera, as we move forward. And then again, we'll have more, if you will, clarification on that when we get together at our meeting in a couple of weeks as well. So after we, on April 3rd, talk about those three particular topics, on the April 17th, we'll be moving into economic development. This is a new element of the City of San Bernardino General Plan. The current general plan does not have such a section. It obviously is related to your ambitions for how you keep a healthy economy in this city. It's about good jobs. It's about good revenue-creating uses in the city, et cetera, and how you are going to achieve those as well. The environmental justice goals and policies are going to be moved probably one or two meetings due to some delays in getting the information, but it will be there within this cycle as well. The May 1st meeting, you see by the topics here, I think they're fairly self-explanatory when you see the titles, will be on parks and recreation and public facilities and services. Then in late May, we'll be coming back to the land use plan tonight. And I'll come back to why you'll see that up there on May 22nd, because it's the plan map again that you're considering tonight, but I'll come back to that, et cetera. Then in September, we'll move into the actual goals and policies that relate to the land use plan map. And then that's all followed up at the end by circulation and infrastructure, utilities, and noise. There's a logic in the sequence in these, because until you have a land use plan map, for example, confirmed through the process, you are unable to calculate the vehicle trips that will be generated from that final land use plans, which then informs the content of the circulation element. The circulation element then informs the content of the noise element, because we have to prepare noise contours based upon those traffic volumes on streets. And so you will see that there's this, if you will, hierarchical sort of presentation here. So the first elements we're getting into here tonight are not necessarily based or driven by having a final land use plan map. As you will see on the schedule, on May 22nd, we're coming back to the land use plan map again. Tonight is, the intent tonight is to basically go back to where you had been when you had been working on the land use plan map, to share with you how that has manifested itself into a formal land use diagram, which I have a large copy sitting here on the table over here tonight. It was distributed to, or access, hopefully you were able to access it online. Thank you, Joel, for suggesting that originally when we were able to make sure we had the technology set up to be able to do that. But the intent between now and May is that this map that we get achieved through tonight's process will be distributed for larger public review and comment. And the intent is that we'll come back to you at the end of May. We'll compile all the comment we receive from the community that's reviewing this land use plan map, and we will then bring those comments to you for you to make any suggested changes to the map based upon what you hear from the general community at large. So what you're seeing here tonight, even when we leave the meeting tonight, is not a final plan map. It is really a benchmark having a plan map, because we need to vet that with the general community to getting feedback and review. And so that's why you will see that we have the land use plan map coming back to you in May as well. Any questions about, there's a lot of material here going to be covered. We're going to keep you busy. There will be no quizzes. Any questions about scheduling where we are here?
Yeah, on the final land use plan, will we actually get to see it before it's submitted to the staff?
Staff reviews it constantly throughout the
Yeah,
process.
but we'll have a chance on the final one to look at it, make sure there's no errors, mistakes.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
I think I know what you're talking about. Okay, any questions on that? Okay.
If there be no other questions, we will receive and file the updated project schedule and move on to the draft for the land use plan.
Okay, so I'm going to take you through a series of slides here on the land use plan. This is just a reminder, and this is attached to your packet here tonight, of when we last had this discussion land use with you in July. This was the compilation of all of your input that you provided for us in July. And if you remember, at that time, when we had the discussions about land use, we focused, as shown on this slide that you see up there, on a number of study areas. We had a discussion about each of those, such as corridors, downtown, areas along the streets, et cetera. I'm not to go into those details here tonight. And those were broken into a series of sub-areas. And if you recall, for each of those, we had the big maps out here on the table, and we had and received your input in terms of preliminary recommendations for each and every one of those sub-areas, which are noted here on the map, but also more legibly was shown in the series of tables that were attached to those maps, where there was information about the sub-areas first identified where they were. There was identification of what the existing zoning was. There was information about the input we had received in our earlier public meetings about the future, and then with your recommendations themselves. So that was back in July. That map was then translated into a formal diagram that would replace the existing general plan land use diagram, et cetera, that looks like something like this. And with that, and I'll come back to this, there was a new legend of permitted land uses that would be associated with that plan map, et cetera. And let me point out that there were, again, I'll come back to that, but there were new categories of land use. I think the primary new categories of land use that are shown on the right-hand side of the legend is previously you did not have a mixed-use classification. And remember, there was considerable discussion with you folks about what locations would be appropriate to accommodate housing with commercial. And there were some various ideas about where that would be and different characterizations of where that occur. For example, in the corridors, there were certain corridors that you wanted to maintain and assure that they be ground level commercial along the street frontage, et cetera, or others corridors where that may not have been so terribly important, but you wanted to make sure that that commercial might be clustered at intersections, et cetera. So that's how the particular, if you will, the land use categories were derived to the right. The densities for the residential were in most cases at the multifamily increased somewhat over what had been designated in the existing general plan. Why were those increased? Because again, the needs to comply for the state law on the housing requirements and to complete an adequate housing element, which you, at your last meeting, you had some discussion about the housing element as well. So this is what came out. This is in effect the visual representation of everything that was in those tables that you saw on the previous pages, et cetera. So it's a direct one-for-one correlation of what you presented. There are some comments that are important to make on this because there have been some modifications that after that map was made, we needed to make some changes, some primarily because of legislation. You know, all that great work you did on identifying locations for housing for commercial areas and which commercial areas were appropriate for adding housing and which ones were not, and then differentiating those in which you would require commercial along a percentage of the corridor. All that is now legally moot. The state legislature has adopted two bills that go into effect July of this year. Those two bills, AB 2011 and SB 6, by de facto, and I'm not going to get into all the detail because it's a very complex series of conditions, basically require the city to allow housing in any commercial piece of property in the city, period. Office. Now, there are various types of commercial. One of the bills is focused on market rate housing, and if the bill that focuses on market rate housing has some labor requirements, use of labor, and also has associated with it the processes for approval that are normal. In other words, it would go through the Planning Commission for review, approval, et cetera. The other bill, 2011, is more focused on a range of housing types, and there's a focus on affordable units, and the housing under that bill is by right with no further review through Planning Commission or City Council. It's an automatic guaranteed for that housing to be built in a commercial district as well. So in effect, all those areas on the map, that last map that I showed you that had these mixed-use classifications, they're irrelevant now. In other words, so we have created some new classifications in respect to considering that we call those what had a mixed-use corridor. We're just calling it a corridor now to differentiate those that are centers because we had various centers you'd identified on the map as well. So that's, I would think, the most predominant change, et cetera. The other change from the existing general plan, but not so much from your, that's item 1 up here on the list. The item over here, too, is basically to indicate, as I just indicated, that there was some residential densities increased to facilitate production of affordable housing for consistency with the housing element. We also did include, but on the original map as well as you did, the downtown specific plan. We also had removed, again, had the mixed use districts and that was changed, et cetera. I should indicate also on the land use designations that you made that we had, you had suggested that the hillside residential densities were too high. I believe you'd indicated the original plan zoning allowed up to 3 units per acre. So your recommendation was to reduce that to a density of 1 unit per acre, which is reflected, you'll see in the plan maps as well. And then there are also some designations that you will see here about some of the very specific discrete districts. We talked about the area, for example, around the baseball stadium and the Orange Show grounds as being discrete hospitality entertainment district, and there are other neighborhood centers as well. And then I should also remind us that when you go back to that earlier diagram where we had the bubble areas that you had studied for, we also had to incorporate all the designations for all those other areas outside of those bubble areas, et cetera. So what we did in preparing the map was to default to the existing general plan, or excuse me, the existing zoning designations for their properties for the land use categories that are shown outside of those areas that are bubbles upon the map, et cetera. Now, again, I emphasize that we defaulted to the zoning for all of the residential designations versus the existing general plan. Just to remind you that the existing general plan diagram has only 2 residential designations, single family and multifamily. Again, another piece of state law has basically indicated that we must now default to the highest density permitted by the general plan for any residential designation. So the problem of just having this one ubiquitous single-family designation, which covers a lot of areas of the city, some of the areas of the city like Verdamont that may have 1 acre lots, for example, it would allow up to 8 units per acre, given that piece of legislation, and you would have to allow any development up to that kind of acreage if we maintained that existing general plan residential designation. So you'll see we're going backwards in times. There was an era in which we were preparing what we call a single zoning and general plan map. For residential, we're basically having to default to that approach now, given state law. State legislation is called no net loss of residential unit legislation, et cetera, which means that a developer can request, and in the code, government code, it cites the general plan, and if the zoning is less than the general plan, it cites that the general plan shall be the ruling determinant of the density for residential property. So you're going to see from the existing general plan map a lot greater densities and greater definition in discrete categories for the residential areas than you have on your official general plan map. But again, we made that corresponding with your zoning map so that there was no question of deviation, which brought us to an issue on one piece of property that, do you want to mention that one? Well, we'll come to it up here in the map as well on that one piece of property.
So I've got a quick question for you, and it may be moot based on the discussion you just had about the change in residential zoning. And I'm going to kind of jump here. October 2nd, we're talking about circulation. Are you talking about transportation corridors?
We're talking about every aspect of circulation. So we talk about circulation, we'll talk about the automobile, we'll talk pedestrian, we'll talk bicycle, we'll talk transit.
Right. So I'm kind of curious, at what point do we mesh the need for public transit, you know, and transit equity, if you will, to residential and service corridors?
When we get to the circulation.
Okay, so we take the circulation to make it match the zoning, or?
How the circulation is derived is our traffic consultants, who I think you've met at some of our earlier meetings when we were first meeting, maybe even by Zoom. The circulation consultant will be taking our land use plan map that we, you know, hopefully tonight or whatever, the one we finally land on. And what we will be doing is quantifying what that means in terms of growth in each, it's called traffic analysis zones. It's like putting a honeycomb, you know, a filter over to the top of the map. So we'll have information about how much population will be there, how many dwelling units, how much population. We'll have information about the square footage of non-residential use, how many commercial, you know, square feet of development, office square feet of development, and other uses as well. Sure. That information goes into a traffic model, which was used earlier in this process they basically calibrated upon what existing use is on the ground today. And they basically will run the model and distribute the trips through the network. And as a part of that process, given the basic standards that will be utilized, they will indicate what will need to be changed or can be changed for circulation so that there is a correlation between the land use map and the circulation map of the city as well. Part of that equation is transit. So, you know, if we, and our policies on transit, so if we require, for example, within a quarter mile of transit stations, I'm just pulling this, as some cities has done, that there's a reduction of parking requirements as a purpose to reduce trips that are by businesses located in, let's say, a quarter mile of a transit station, et cetera. That equation plays into the traffic modeling that's done. So there might be some trip reduction that occurs, et cetera, based upon transit. But all that's taken for account in this traffic modeling. And then what also comes out of the modeling is any need to modify the map based upon the land use map.
That was my question as well. You have another opportunity to revisit the.
It's an iterative
Okay,
process.
perfect. Thank you.
And then, of course, all that gets translated into then the environmental impact report, which I don't even have here on the schedule, comes at the end of all that.
Yeah, clarify this for me. Up in North Verdamont, we're going to have minimum 1 acre parcels. And a developer, when he does a track, Is it stay 1 acre parcel and then the new owners can put ADUs or other housing on it? Or does the developer have the right to?
Okay, well, that's something I did to bring up here because it doesn't affect our land use designations per se. The other legislation, which actually was in place before we started this process, was the ADUs, which is legislation that allows an ADU to be on any single-family lot. So if you have a 1 acre lot, by law, a owner of that property is entitled and legally entitled to build what's called an accessory dwelling unit, et cetera. And there's something, I don't need to get all the technical, there's also something called a junior ADU, which is actually if it's attached to the unit, like an extra room, let's say, in an existing unit, et cetera. This is complicated even further by what's piece of legislation that was enacted, it's called SB 9. SB 9 allows any single-family residential lot to be split into 2 lots. So on any one of those split lots, you can have then your main unit and your ADU, et cetera. So on what you used to be able, to simplify this legally, on what used to be a lot, legal lot of record, in which you had one house, you can legally now, if you, and again, this is at the owner's initiative, can build up to 4 units on that lot. That's
Okay.
law, that's state law.
Yeah, okay, the developer, he's got a tentative track, he's doing 1 acre lots, and we have some ADUs that are being done now on some of the
I'm
properties.
familiar with the project.
But my question really is how far can he go with that? Does he basically stay with what the plan is with the city and let the new future owners of the parcels add the additions, or can the developer, after he's got a tentative track plan?
If you already have an ADU on the lot, that's not another ADU. Because you already, that's already, that is, if it's a legally designated ADU,
Okay,
et cetera, those are the 2 units.
yeah, we have developers right now putting
Yeah.
ADUs on new housing.
Right.
One ADU. So he's limited to 1 ADU, the developer, and that's in the track plan when he's building or what have you. The city's approved that. After he sells,
After someone buys that lot.
after somebody buys the home or what have you, he can add or do what he wants, right?
He has.
Up to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can just state that, yeah, per state law, once you have 1 ADU, it's 1 ADU. You don't get
don't
to
get
keep
more.
adding it with each subsequent property owner. That property owner could, if there's room on the property, they could convert a portion of the space or an addition to a junior ADU. And again, not to get too technical, but once you have a junior ADU, it requires owner occupancy. So the owner must live in one of those units. And that's recorded on the title, on the deed.
Yeah, that's for a certain period of time. In it, 3 years or something like that,
No, that's
Yeah.
SB 9. That's a separate issue. No, the ADU runs with the property unless state law changes again to take that away.
okay. But once he's got an approved plan already, can he still change what he wants to do on that property? He has an approved plan with the city. I'm using basically North Vernon Heights, which we got a lot of building going on up there, and future building is on 1 acre lots. So can he add more, since it's already a tentative track, can he on his own decide to add more than what the city has already approved?
No, so I think what you're saying is could they subdivide it into smaller lots? That would be SB 9, and SB 9 also requires owner occupancy as part of it. So you have to live in one of the resulting properties. So you can't, a developer or investor cannot go in and split 10 lots that they happen to have to increase their density per state law.
Okay, so it'd have to be the new owner that
Under SB
does
9,
it.
correct. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Obviously, the big thing that's in a state of flux, in reality, there's also, interestingly enough, a study that was conducted by the Tenor Institute out of Berkeley of the impact of SB 9 since it has been I think it was enacted a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago now officially in terms of the date of application. It has yielded very little in terms of real housing development, et cetera. There is a piece of legislation, and one of the reasons why is a lot of cities under SB 9, well, cities under SB 9 period have the ability to still have basically development standards on the lots, things like side yard setbacks and other kinds of, provisions, driveway access, et cetera, et cetera. There is a pending piece of legislation you should keep your eyes on. The legislature has reacted to the fact that very little has been done. There's been quite a bit of done ADUs statewide, I will say, in terms of building ADUs, so that legislation's had some degree of success. So the legislature is considering in this session a bill to basically limit the restrictions that can be imposed by cities on some of the development standards on properties to try to facilitate more lot splits. Just keep your eyes open.
What happens down the road? We've got some cities that are fighting the state because they want local control and stuff. They could change this. The state could lose, the cities could win. Then how will that affect our general
And
plan?
It depends on how that judgment would come down. In terms of if the state loses that, then in effect the requirements that have been imposed would possibly become, or could be, could be overridden by that action. But we don't know how that's going to play out. I will not comment upon the one city that's been sued by the state, because I've worked in that city. And some of us know the current city manager in that city. So,
And that's really a policy decision. Staff is going to move forward, just trying to follow the latest legislation, trying to chase the state, basically, and just trying to be on, provide that guidance and recommendation to you, the Planning Commission, and City Council as projects go forward.
Yeah,
I think
about
one
9
of-
out of 10 existing residents like to keep a quiet neighborhood and not have the infrastructure change and have traffic and everything else that goes in. You don't want a bunch of rentals in a residential area. That's bad news.
okay, keep your eyes open. Okay, let me move forward here.
I have a question that's in addition to what he's saying. The residential densities increased to facilitate production of about, that means any type of housing, apartment, single-family units?
And we will
and-
come to the tables in a minute.
Okay,
Because the table, the increases, yes, the overall densities, some of your higher densities, for example, the downtown plan is going up to, in some cases, 100 units per acre. And the downtown plan densities, your existing general plan densities, maximum, I believe, it was, what's your existing general plan density, maximum 32 units? 30 units per acre, and even 30 units per acre is considered below that normally, except, well, it's the threshold of what the State Department of Housing and Community Development considers to be a sufficient density to generate affordable units. So in the housing element, that basically ramps up the densities to something that will be considered, it doesn't ramp them up to 100 units per acre, but it does increase it to a level that are considered to be feasible densities to accommodate development. This is based upon economic studies to a developer. How much is it going to cost to create an affordable unit within the community? So it's primarily the single family, what I'll call the single-family residential, other than these other legislations, densities haven't changed, but the mid and higher levels of the multifamily have been raised a little bit. to ensure that there's some affordable building.
I was wondering if there was a preference, single versus apartments and so forth, and if how much the community would, we talk about it being feasible for the community. What is that? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, part of the housing element, in terms of getting the housing element, since we're not talking about that was last meeting, but we'll come back to this as well. Certification of the housing element, the state now, HCD, Department of Housing and Community Development, is basically when the sites that are identified in the housing element to be the sites for affordable units. The state now is basically almost requiring cities to demonstrate the feasibility of developing those units and that can be marketable for the low-income groups within the area as well. In other words, they're requiring things like pro forma analyses where you identify all the costs of actual construction on a site, cost of improving infrastructure, then the ability to gain enough revenue to make it financially feasible for someone to come in and actually build those units. That's why, as Mark Hoffman said in a few meetings ago, is that the reality is that the lower end of the spectrum, very low and the very low, the units are actually probably not going to be created through the normal marketplace, even with the bonus densities, but are going to have to be created through some other mechanism such as subsidies or the inclusionary requirements themselves. Changes what? I'm sorry. I haven't seen any legislation change. But don't count it out. Okay, let me go on. This is back to, again, your land use plan map. In fact, I should reverse these slides a little bit. But what I've shown here on the screen is the residential categories that you will see here. And the reason this is called out is your existing general plan in this category has one single family and one multifamily. This was breaking it down by the various categories that are reflective of the diversity of your residential categories in your existing zoning with any modifications on the, if you will, on the for the density numbers that we talked about here. So that's, if you look at this map, the one you'll see tonight, but this again is your original map or version of your original map. There's that difference that you will see on the map itself. The next difference you will see on your map from your existing general plan map are these. These are the areas that you identified as mixed use. So at the time that we worked together previously in July, there were no mixed use designations on your existing general plan map. So these are new categories that were added to your map for that purpose themselves. And then there were categories here also shown for basically if I can read my glasses correctly here, I'm correct on this, for the, yes, we created, if you remember in your discussion, there was some intent to create neighborhood commercial, identify those areas that were more of a commercial neighborhood orientation than just, if you will, highway or the bigger centers. So they were basically smaller places that would be where you could walk to from a residential neighborhood, et cetera. So that's a new category upon the map that did not previously exist. So as I indicated, that we took your map, and that was the outcome. Those are the comments on the map, et cetera. And then we had some modifications. And just to re-summarize what those modifications are to your original map was to basically the designation of commercial in all residential zones. We have also suggesting a new industrial category. The recognition, some concerns about the scale of some of the industrial buildings that are occurring, for example, the warehousing, et cetera. There was some discussion that there may be some areas of the city that larger footprint, bigger industrial building may not be appropriate. The area may be appropriate, for example, we talk about the area sort of near the Orange Show, et cetera, where there's old, small industrial buildings, et cetera. And there may be in a number of locations because of the scale of property, because of it being adjacent to a residential neighborhood, there would be the desire to not have the larger warehousing uses, but would allow all the other uses in industrial zones, but to limit the square footage of the building building footprint that might occur within that area. So there's a suggestion of a new category. We call it industrial flex. It could be called industrial 2. It could be called industrial small. You could be called Richard, you could call it Richard's name, whatever you can call it. But the idea is to create this new category of industrial that differentiates those kind of places on the map. So on the map that you will see here tonight. On the plan map that we have shared with you also, there are a couple of places that need to be resolved. We need further discussion with the San Manuel tribe about some of the intentions for their pieces of property. That conversation has not occurred yet, though there has been some initial discussion. There were a couple of pieces of property that they owned out at the east end of the city that we just wanted some clarification regarding intentions that they had there. And then for the purposes of at least this plan diagram, we have incorporated all of the specific plans, except we defaulted in the Waterman baseline to only the use map of the specific plan. This is still an issue to be resolved. So what you will see on the plan map in front of you tonight is the designations out of the Waterman baseline specific plan, no changes from that. But are those changes? There's some question about whether that area will be also called out with a boundary around it called specific plan. These are just some technical changes to the map. It doesn't really affect content per se themselves. So let me go through, these are the categories which are attached, et cetera, the proposed new development categories and land use classifications, et cetera. So the first of those that are on the screen are the various residential classifications themselves. What you will see at the lower end of these is again, the RR is the rural residential, which is the 1 acre lot. There is then the large lot, or the 3.5 units per acre lot, which is consistent again with current zoning. There is, we took what were called the residential suburban category, which is pretty abundant throughout the city on your zoning map, and we just called it a traditional neighborhood because that is the intent, which would be primarily single-family detached units, typical lot size, 6,000, 7,000 square foot, 5,000 square foot lot, which is what you think of the typical residential neighborhood, et cetera. The residential medium gets you into some multi-units at some relatively low densities. This might be courtyard housing. This might be, townhouses integrated, et cetera, 16 units per acre. It's about double the single-family density. And then we move up the density designations, and this is where the increases have occurred. You will see multifamily medium, which has moved up from the 24 to 32 at the high end. Again, 24 would never qualify under HCD for affordable units, so to enable us to create some affordability there, we moved up to 24. And then the urban neighborhood was moved up to 60 units per acre as a maximum, 14 to 16 units per acre up from the existing 31, et cetera. So those are the categories. If you look at this table, you will see then the description of the uses permitted within these areas. Obviously, the intent in some of these neighborhoods is to have what we call integration of potentially a mix of different housing products and types. So in a residential neighborhood, you might have a duplex and a triplex along with a single-family unit, or maybe some townhome densities, et cetera. So rather than having sort of a homogeneity throughout of these areas. And then on the chart, you will see three categories of commercial. They're basically, the only real new one here is this neighborhood commercial category. And these are, again, those sort of small locations. I'll show you a couple of areas on the map where these occur. But these were the areas which you identified in your discussion as great places, what might be truly neighborhood orientation to the commercial, might be a place that's walkable from your neighborhood or integrated into your neighborhood, et cetera. The other general commercial, office commercial are basically categories similar to what you have today, et cetera. And then we have, and then one I forgot, regional commercial was also, and that's, again, consistent with your existing regional commercial designation. Think of the area down by Hospitality Lane that has a regional commercial classification. So really south of downtown have that designation. And then what had been our mixed-use corridors, et cetera, we have basically three different classifications. We were opting originally just to go to one single corridor classification, like, and this is, you know, the strips along Baseline and Highland and Mount Vernon and D Street and E Street, et cetera, that we see on the map. And we'll see some of these on the map in a few minutes. But the reason why we created a second category was to try to differentiate, for example, D and E Street, because D and E Street are somewhat different from each other. The intent of one is to have some higher intensity of development, and so that's why you'll see a slightly different category. Same uses, but the differentiation is really kind of the intensity and density of use that might be permitted within that area. The mixed-use centers are those areas that you identified on the map. Remember, we had the discussion of these larger commercial centers that might be grocery store and maybe a small Walmart or something like that that had surface parking lot. Your direction as we provided and were developing the plan was to allow some housing in there to create a more pedestrian-oriented environment, integrate these uses in there. So we've retained the designation there as a mixed-use center on the maps itself. The next categories you'll see on this chart are the industrial classifications. That up there, I can't barely see the screen. The industrial classifications, and again, there are two classifications in the basic differentiation. One is the industrial sort of catch-all, as you have today. And then the industrial flex is, again, or it could be called industrial small. It's really for those smaller footprint. Need to work with staff on what the maximum size of building would be here. I arbitrarily pulled a number from the air and said 50,000 square feet. That's larger than a grocery store, but smaller than a Amazon distribution center. So we'll work with staff in determining what the appropriate threshold would be on that category. The map also has the airport, has its own classification called the airport zone, if you will. And then you will see here, these are the specific plan areas that are called out on the plan map for specific plans. And obviously, in the general plan, it will default to the specific plans for guidance regarding how those particular areas will be developed and the uses and densities that would be occur. And then the bottom categories on this chart are, again, existing categories on your map are the public uses, public facilities, flood control, et cetera, so forth. So how these all play out on the map is here, and there's a larger version, printed version over here at the table if you want to look at as well. And I'm just going to go through this relatively briefly because what we're looking for here tonight is any feedback you have on some of the basic ideas on this map. If there's anything that you did previously that you would want to change, et cetera, for the map. So this is, I divided the map into some quadrants here to blow it up. Here, the overall city map is here. And so we're first sort of focusing in on the northwest, which is Vermont, the college area, et cetera. There's one error on this map with Dave is going to mention, and maybe Dave, you can mention the one up at the top.
Yeah, it's been brought to our attention that there was a mapping error. Yeah, the area on the former Bice property, as it's known as, it's the top circle on the screen here. That property there was pointed out to us by a couple members of the community and one of our committee members here that it's designated commercial. That was not our intent to designate the Bice property as commercial. That should be residential, just like the surrounding area. So apologize for the confusion. And that's why we have this checks and balance process with the committee to identify things we missed and errors. And so you'll see there's a lot that staff is working on concurrently with the PlaceWorks team. So there tends to be mistakes made, but yeah.
That's why we said we're not finalizing it until the end of May, et cetera, in terms of the map. You'll note I've already just marked up, the printed version has the error in it as well. I didn't have time to change the map, but you'll see that I've crossed it out and done a residential low category over there as well, so from there. Because again, of time, we could spend a lot of time going through all the detail on the map. I think you're obviously familiar with this area. I just want to call out, going back, call out that in what this map all called out that the sort of major activity areas were the areas adjacent to the university, whether you call it a university district, et cetera. There's been some recent housing construction. There's some properties in there that you designated, as you'll see, the purple as a mixed-use center, so allowing both housing and commercial to be developed. This is the area, there's some vacant property in there that has not been developed, and that was your intent. And then the other major, besides obviously the linear corridor of industrial, the area is just immediately south of that, a number of parcels that contain a mix of commercial and multifamily residential, and those designations per your input were retained for those purposes. So there were really no changes or deviations from what you originally had recommended in this area. This was just really elevating it a little bit in terms of the nature of what these areas are as specific districts, et cetera. So moving to the northeast, this is the area that extends out, again, as you will see, out by the San Manuel properties, is indicating again that we need to have some further conversation with. Obviously, it's got the major corridor running east-west that you had discussed as mixed use. The purple colors, just to remind you, in the legend, were all colors that intended originally for mixed use, but now become commercial corridors. Other than there are a number of sites out here that you will see that are a darker, solid color. Those were the locations that you identified to be this mixed-use village center, if you will, for those areas. And there are some other uses within their area, but let me highlight some of these here as well. These are two of the examples of neighborhood centers that were identified up on 40th Street, as well as over here north of downtown, et cetera. These are areas that have a small square footages of commercial uses, et cetera. And these were areas that you called out to being particular places that you would want to sort of focus and prioritize the development of neighborhood serving commercial uses themselves. We then have again, the centers. In other words, these were the larger commercial properties that were characterized by having large surface asphalt parking lots that at the time you said were good locations that besides commercial, adding housing in this area. We've got a great sort of illustrative sketch of one of these that we will bring to a future meeting of this particular one, of this particular corner intersection as well. And again, so these were the areas that you had identified as being mixed-use centers. So just distinguishing the corridor itself. Along the corridor, as you recall, you had a mix of commercial and what we called mixed-use corridors. This is all that gets redesignation, as you will see here, as a corridor classification on the plan map, et cetera. And then moving to the south end of the city, and I've got some area-wide sort of comments on this one and then blow this up. You will see here, obviously, that there were a number of major industrial areas, including the airport, and the major concentrations of these are the larger scale industrial properties that you will see here, obviously southwest of the airport and the flight zone of the airport. We had some discussion, if you recall, in here about the issues of some areas. There were little pockets of residential existing in that area, and we had a discussion. Your direction was to provide in their long-term evolution ultimately to 100% industrial over time. And so I think you will see that these diagrams sort of clarify that out as well. Within these areas, as you will also note in the description, there are some parcels today. When you look at the zoning map, you will see like a corner. Maybe on a particular street has a corner store or a corner gas station, et cetera, so commercial. So we opted not in the general plan map to show that particular parcel or those particular parcels as commercial, given that the written description of the industrial districts allow those small scale commercial uses to be integrated into and within the industrial areas. You might have a restaurant within an industrial area that serves the employees of that area, but no reason to need the predominant use is industrial is really the intent, and then you may have ancillary uses that are also supportive of the employees and make it, the industrial places better. So these are the major industrial areas in the community, and then the other areas are the regional commercial areas, obviously the hospitality lane, commerce center area, areas north and south of the freeway, and then the southern portions of D Street, E Street, D Street, et cetera. The regional commercial corridor you've had before, that again is a reflection of what's on ground, but when we blow this up, obviously the other form giver in this area is the new specific plan for the downtown area. The downtown plan, just so you know, we didn't mention this earlier, but I believe Dave will mention a little earlier, is close to completion, and Dave will have a little more insight about that a little bit later. So again, for the general plan map, it will show it as a new specific plan area. And then we will also then, if you recall, the areas south of the airport, the downtown area, we have the blue area here is the baseball stadium. And then we talked about creating a district that also then would relate to the Orange Show ground with some intention by the Orange Show individuals to begin to think about revitalizing this area and to create a larger mixed-use area. They characterized it a little bit as like LA Live, maybe a smaller version of LA Live in downtown LA, but a place you would have housing, restaurants, commercial, sports-related, hospitality, entertainment-related uses. So the purple area is basically the mixed-use areas. Basically, what this is a change from an industrial designation on your current plan map to allow for that mix of uses themselves. There is also to the east of this area that has a small industrial uses. This is an area that we would particularly identify as being suitable for this industrial flex, which you might have incubator, you may have artist studios, you might have arts districts. All this has the capability of creating, I think, a really distinct district in the downtown. But these were all ideas that you discussed with us and are now reflected upon this map itself. And then we had the area around the Santa Fe Depot. Again, you recognize as we were looking at that, that there were vacant pieces of property over there, that there was the opportunity with the depot to do something about it, adaptive reuse of the depot, and to be able to begin to think about some minor intensification of uses, scaled obviously to transition with the adjoining residential areas, but to also be the opportunity for some kind of create a destination activity center, maybe some restaurants, maybe some other kinds of supporting uses, maybe a railroad museum, something like that begins to capitalize upon it as a particular district itself. We then have multiple, in this portion of town, multiple corridors, north, east, west, Highland Baseline, DE Street, and to the west as well, that have historically been that area, and your notion. In each of these areas, just to remind you, were the areas in which you did do some fine-grained definition of mixed use. You'll see the original map, we had like 3 different mixed use categories based upon, indeed, the mix of uses within this areas. It now, by default, becomes one kind of category, again, because of the reflection of state law. We don't have the ability to control it the same way we used to be able to control it, et cetera. These are, again, generalized boundaries, just so you know as well. There's another area that is, I thought it was on this map, but I need to refer to it as well. Okay, let me go back to that. The area around the college, which is down here, right here. Remember, there's a parcel to the northwest of the college that we talked about the opportunity for having a residential designation, that this was youth in the discussion, considered to be a sort of an ideal location for housing, for faculty, for students, and so forth. Since we had this discussion, that piece of property, you'll see a different color here, has been acquired by the railroad, Santa Fe Railroad. Their intent is not housing. So it will be obviously some kind of supporting, we don't know exactly what it is, but it will be something that is probably compatible with indeed their operations as well. So this is a deviation, that site is a deviation from what you had identified and designated on the particular map, just for clarity as well, to ask if there's any change as well. So that's the 10-second, 10-minute overview of the map with any, from what you had done, with any deviations from the map, et cetera. And we're basically here to, any issues you have, any concerns, because the intent, just to indicate after tonight, is what we'll do basically is correct the error on the map that we've already identified. Excuse me, any other changes that you have identified, and then we will be posting this on the project website, and we'll be walking through a process of getting public review and feedback on this so that the general community at large has the opportunity also to have comments about errors on the map, if there are any additional errors as well as to provide input about any desires, objectives that they have for a particular property or something they find that is not really responsive to what they see this community to be in the future. So that's where it goes after tonight.
And I'll just add, we do have one, at least one public comment speaker card for this item.
Good evening. My name is Karen Suarez. I live in the 7th Ward. I'm also the director of Uplift San Bernardino at the Making Hope Happen Foundation. I did have some clarifying questions. There was a slide on slide 14 where you mentioned where San Bernardino Valley College had designated for housing. I was just curious, what is the existing zoning of that area? And it does say that it has been redesignated as industrial, and like, when did that happen? And was it a part, or is it going to be a part of this process? And then the other question I had was related to the inclusion of the Waterman Baseline Specific Plan on slide 15. I wanted to know if you could please clarify why only a portion of the plan is being considered, specifically the land use portions. I did flag this Waterman Baseline Specific Plan to SCAG last year because it was the only specific plan out of all the specific plans that the city has that wasn't included. And so we've received awards for this specific plan. There was a ton of community engagement. It was done between like 2015, 2016. I remember being a part of it. And there were a lot of community-based organizations. It's what encompasses Arrowhead Grove and really all the way down to Seacom Lake. So this plan is really important to the community. A lot of our residents who were in formerly Waterman Gardens live in Valencia Grove now, live in the newer parts, Olive Meadow, Crestview Terrace. They still live here. And so I'm just curious, you know, what will it take for us to be inclusive of that plan? Because all the other plans seem to be fine and acceptable. And just curious why this one isn't. And the last part was that I really appreciate the maps. Like, there's a separate map that was provided that's super color coded, but I can't tell what streets they are. And even though I'm super familiar with the city and drive around every district, even though I live in the 7th Ward, I'm having a hard time figuring out what the major cross streets are. And so if you could just put like which one's Highland, and basically the major corridors. And then the last question was the major corridor, this one that we're looking at, doesn't include the eastern portion of our city, and just curious about like Del Rosa. Is that considered a corridor? Because like the northern part of Del Rosa kind of does have a commercial area, even though it's short. And so would love to get some clarification on that.
It does. Let me go backwards partially, and I asked city staff to help on the valley, on both the Waterman baseline. This is a land use map. So all the other content of the specific plan, et cetera, the land uses map here correspond one for one what's on the Waterman baseline specific plan, et cetera. So we're not today talking about policy, which is in the Waterman specific plan, development standards, et cetera. We're only talking about the map. So that's one of the reasons the map, we just wanted to make sure it mimicked as much that as well. We've had some internal discussion where all the specific plans should be actually just be the land use map rather than the specific plan, use specific plans as an overlay designation. So that's clarification. The Del Rosa area is shown as commercial, as I recall, on the plan map. You can look at the detailed map over here as well. One of the other things we also provided, there's on the memo of distribution, which you may not have, there is, but I can give you my copy of this. There is a website you can go to and pull up the map, and it gives you the ability to zoom in, et cetera. So it's a real handy, and for the map that's going to be published on the project website, we'll include this reference so people can zoom in and out, so you'll be able to clearly to see the streets. I mean, you can get down parcel level on that map as well. So it'll be perfect for your use as well. Did I cover everything?
The property adjacent to the San Bernardino Valley College.
I'll ask Dave or somebody to respond to that.
Do you know the current zoning off the top of your head?
I believe the current zoning designation is commercial heavy. Yeah, it's that whole area behind the shopping, south of the shopping center. Yes, yeah, so it was all commercial heavy. As Woody had mentioned earlier, was designated anything yet. Either, there was the discussion about, housing for the college. Now we're talking about what could be done, maybe more to what the current property owner would be interested in. What I would say is similar to the San Manuel properties. We have large stakeholders that are buying property for certain purposes. We're going to work with them to kind of identify what their intention is, because it's unlikely, especially with the recent purchases, they're going to be theirs. So we want to make sure that we know what they're looking to do so we can kind of coordinate with what we're trying to zone for in those same areas.
And I believe that was all the public comments we had.
For item 2, so technically for 3, so once we move on further, just heads up.
Did he answer the one about the property adjacent to North Valley College?
Yeah,
That was what his answer was? Okay.
Yeah, with the railroad owning that property, it's like, they're a big, powerful entity, and as Woody said, they're not likely to build housing. So we need to get a clear understanding of what their intent is for that property before we,
But they did purchase it,
that's our understanding.
they
Yeah.
That's correct, yes.
because I do remember that it was slated for affordable housing for students and so forth, and everybody seemed to like that. Everybody, Karen, right?
Yeah.
And then the Pacific Railroad came in, they were bigger and more resourceful and bought the property, but that seems to be really close to other residential units, What do they plan, well, we don't know what they're planning to do with it.
No, we don't. All we know is that they bought the property. We just haven't had any conversation with them.
That one's a little tricky because it is right next to commercial. There is residential to the south, you have the school across the street, but it's also just about the only property surrounding the existing rail yard that's not already developed. The only significant property, so that was presumably where the one place they saw, for any future expansion. So
Well,
it's
I can imagine
kind of
that
in
when,
between everything there.
I can imagine that when they decided it's going to come before the planning commission, whoa, is that going to be? Because they are surrounded by residential and commercial and so forth. Okay. Are there any questions from the panel, about the draft land use that was presented?
I just had one, and this is on the ward-specific maps that you distributed. In the 7th Ward, you've got an area designated as 7E, but then it doesn't show up in the recommendations. And I was just curious if that was a oversight or what the note was with that.
The designation was just to continue the residential, that's just immediately to the west of that. That's what the map is, that's what its zone is as well. those are those extremely deep parcels, and some of them are landlocked, if you will, and we had that discussion actually with the committee, but they would be the same designation that's to the west of that as well.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I
Thank you
got
for
one
catching
question. Is, on the specific plans, wasn't there a Mount Vernon corridor specific plan?
There was, but and that's one of those that doesn't really pertain to land use as well. It's a series of guidelines about how the area would be used as what I'll characterize part of it as a thematic district for the neighborhood, if you will, as well as for the kind of character of streetscapes and the public realm design, et cetera. All those are good ideas that would be retained, but it's not a land use plan per se. So there was actually another one of the existing specific plans we also deleted because it did not have land use ramifications to it. So this was just a list of those that really, where the uses themselves are described in detail in the plan themselves.
And just to clarify, we're not deleting the specific plan, we're just removing it from the general
From the
plan
map.
land use map. So it still
Still exists.
exists.
Any other questions? Then do we have a consensus that the draft plan reflects the committee's deliberations or prior deliberations then? We accepted them.
And to
Okay.
clarify, with the change to the Vice property, that
Right.
we're going to correct those
Right.
types of issues.
Yeah, I have one question, again, regarding the North Vermont, that error that was done. We had it marked as residential. I don't remember if we had marked it as recreation at all. Residential, recreation. If we didn't, with the committee's approval, I'd like to make that residential slash recreation. Because we have a soccer field up there, which is really, it's too small for the usage. They need a bigger soccer field. We got the Little League facility up there and stuff like that. It's a great area for recreation, too.
Okay, this is going to be back to my legal definition of what we can do and what we can't do in a land use map itself. In the description of the residential areas, we talk about having the opportunity for recreational supporting uses, parks and other recreational uses in the descriptive narrative. We cannot designate sites for a recreational use that is going to be not developable for a use, at minimum, a single-family residence. That's considered a legal taking of property. So we need to basically get to what you want to achieve, and we can do that through the narrative and the policy that we're talking about in the plan as we develop the plan, that would be a focus of this particular area, because we'll have some sub-area recommendations in the policies themselves.
Okay, this particular area, the Bryce, I guess it's called, the city owns that.
That's
So
correct.
I guess they could do with it what they want. The city can pretty much,
We'll make sure we have narrative that includes that, though.
okay.
But I would stray away from any recreation designations anywhere on this map, unless it's a commercial recreation, it's going to be a commercial use.
I have a question. Dave, could you explain, just, you mentioned that you're going to remove the specific plan from the land use map, but the development standards for the specific plan will still apply then, as I understand. Is that the case?
That's correct, though. This is where we need to have further conversation with the staff. Again, some of the development standards, like I mentioned, residential change.
Right.
And so there will need to be a discussion of what's called consistency, because the specific plans are required by law to be consistent with the general plan. So we just need to have those conversations with staff about how we do address that issue. But all the other than density, all the other development standards obviously would pertain, because there's obviously some of them have design guidance and other kinds of guidance, et cetera, in them. None of those go away.
Can we move forward then with the land use plan next steps? The process for publication and public review.
Yeah, so
be discussed.
It's just, yes, as I indicated, that the next steps is to have published this, made available for community review, take it out to the community, get the community to feedback. It'll be technically a couple of days. We'll provide that great handy dandy website link to be able to zoom in on the map, et cetera. And then we'll set up on the website basically an announcement that's readily available, and we're seeking for feedback and review, and we'll provide some mechanisms for the public, and those are still in design to get public feedback on those as well. And we're still talking about other public outreach mechanisms given where we are in public outreach, to be able to get broader community input on the plan. I will indicate also there's going to be a conceptualized version of the map prepared. We're preparing a little brochure kind of thing, et cetera, because obviously there's a lot of detail on that plan map, but on sort of the bigger bubbles like the centers and the corridors and, you know, the airport, et cetera, those will be generally designated on a concept map. I didn't bring it with me here tonight, but that's intended to be, a lot of people will be interested in that, to take a look at that at a very conceptualized area level.
And
It's a graphic.
I'll just add that staff has limited resources to really do a huge public outreach process for the land use map, but it is important, as Woody indicated, the land use map sort of guides everything else in the general plan. And so we need to make sure we get it right, and need to make sure we get public input. We'll have it on the website. We'll make that link available, hopefully through social media or other means to get that word out. But we really rely on everyone up here and everyone in the audience and anyone else watching to really get the word out. Tell your friends, neighbors, any other groups or organizations you're part of to please share that link and help spread the word about this process. It's important. We do want community involvement. You're looking between Travis and I. We're the only two that are working on all of the general plan projects in the city, and that's just part of our job here. We've got a lot of other tasks here that we're responsible for. So we're really limited on how much we can do. And so, you know, it's a collaborative effort. We just ask that everyone participate in that and help us out and get that word out.
I will say that at the end, before a year ago in March, when the council decided to move in another direction on outreach, that we had established some good relationships with CBOs in the community, a number of CBOs. We intend to contact them to let them, as much as they can, we'll provide them resource information. We can't conduct the meetings for them, but we can at least let them know of the availability and of the need to get the word out. So we have all the contact information that we had then, including the schools, because the last couple of sessions we had with the schools were pretty extraordinary in terms of input. So we will make sure that we can contact them to move forward, see what we can do.
Yeah, you know, in the year and a half that we've been meeting, we've got a moving target. Seems like Sacramento keeps throwing more things at us and more things at us. And do you think we're ever going to catch up? I mean, it's pathetic, because we've got a year and a half sitting there, and a lot of that is, you know.
Yep.
And we can't, I don't think anybody can forecast Sacramento, but can we think that we can get ahead of them a little bit?
We have our handle on it as best we can. I mean, we can't obviously control what they do. And if you follow the housing element at all, one of the things that happened very much at the last minute, within, what was it, a month of the deadline for the submittal of housing elements, the original deadline, et cetera, the state passes out what's called the Fair Housing Assessment technical paper for what you were supposed to undertake as a part of your housing element to review. And if you read the technical paper, what's called technical evaluation for fair housing, it's very detailed, and I defy anybody to complete the technical work in that in a month. So, we're in a world where, we have to do the best we can relative to changing legislation. Now, the good news is we're at the beginning of this legislative session, and legislature, basically, the new laws basically surface at the end of the year. So around October, November, et cetera. We do have, I'm a member of an organization called the California Planning Roundtable, and we did have our usual meeting in Sacramento with legislature in January to be debriefed about what's coming up. So we have, I think, a pretty good handle of what we can expect this year. But that doesn't mean something else is not going to pop up, because that's what we learned back in January.
Is it, I don't know, at least I've never heard her, but to have the mayor announce about this on being online and for people, encourage the people to get online and review and so forth? Have we had that before?
Have we had that before here in the city? I don't know.
Okay. I would think so, seeing that she is the leader of the city, and we're listening or tuning in on whenever they have a meeting, that she would make an announcement that this is something that, in fact, it should be something good, because, the GP, it's all within her administration to say, this is what's happening, it's ongoing, please, we encourage everyone to go online and look at it, to review. So I know that we will do our part in telling other people about it, and hopefully the audience as well, but I think we should hear it from her, as well as all the other council members. So with that, would you send her, seeing that you're staff?
Yes.
Would you send her a memo or something in writing to that effect?
We've got a meeting
Absolutely.
scheduled with her in a week or two.
Yeah.
So this will be a perfect opportunity. Thanks for bringing it up.
Okay.
Because Karen, who's working on the downtown specific plan, and myself and Dave are meeting with her in probably 2 weeks.
Yeah, and we'll be going over the timeline so far and the remainder of the whole general plan project, including downtown specific plan, housing element. We'll be briefing her on all of that, getting her up to speed. And so, yeah, we'll bring that up at that time. I think that's a great idea.
Great idea.
Tell her I said so.
Okay.
Also, I would like to say something. If it's possible, you can provide the resources in different languages, so we have more participation from the city. We are a multicultural city, so definitely we do need different languages involved there.
Yes. Yeah, everything's been published in Spanish as well.
We do have some public comment on this item, I believe, if
Yeah.
you'd like to entertain
Michael?
that.
Do we?
We're one
Oh,
gentleman
okay,
who wants to comment
okay.
on this item, yes.
Go ahead.
Good evening, members of the committee and chairperson. My name is Michael Hackis. I'm a 15-year union carpenter here, and I'm also a member of Local 909, which has 1,100 members of the community here in San Bernardino and 5,700 members in the Inland Empire. My job as an instructor to teach our apprentices and journey persons how to be successful in the trade. I'm also a native of the Inland Empire. I was born and raised here. I've seen this place go through its ups and downs. I got to participate and lay out the redevelopment of Norton Air Force Base with the Shared Brothers distribution over there, and that created a lot of construction jobs, also created a lot of local jobs, permanent jobs there. We ask that when you guys are going through this process, I know you're not printing policy yet, but to keep in mind that you understand that the Carpenters Union, we're here for jobs, wages, and benefits for our members, prevailing wage, retirement, pensions, all the stuff that we strive to work for. And a lot of our work is not local. We do a lot of time commuting to LA County, Orange County, and everything else, burning fuel. Also, that's not good for our climate mitigation things that we're trying to do as well. We're working really hard with our partners in the local school districts to diversify our workforce, to bring in more members.
that can work here locally. As we continue to move forward as a society, our union carpenters are moving ahead, training in renewable energy, renewable resources, wind, solar. I just anecdotally just got back from an additional 40 hours of training in solar to make sure that we're ready when the stuff comes down, that your union carpenters, your local union carpenters are ready to face these challenges ahead. We're members of the community. We're here for you. We're partners in this with you guys, with everybody around us, and we want to make sure that we give you the most highly skilled and trained workforce. I know there's a lot of stuff coming down from Sacramento that we're trying to stay ahead from as well, but we're ready to face it and also earn a good living wage, jobs and benefits for our members. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Are there any announcements from, or committee report from the advisory committee? Any announcements you wish to make? Then the director's report?
Yeah, as Woody mentioned, just to provide you an update of everything else going on under the general plan umbrella. As mentioned, the housing element, we are delinquent on. We are working furiously to get to the finish line on that. We are anticipating we've been working closely with the PlaceWorks team over the last, since I've been here forever. So we are close to having a draft housing element. We did release the technical background reports that sort of, that are the basis for the housing element a few months ago, and those are still available on the website. And then the housing element, we are anticipating that for staff's review within the next couple weeks. Then we will do a quick 2-week review of the housing element, provide that feedback to the PlaceWorks team. They'll make any further revisions over a week or two. So within the next month, we anticipate having a publicly available draft housing element for comment and review. That will feed into the general plan and will go alongside it. But while we're working on the remainder of the general plan, we will be submitting that to HCD after the public review period. HCD, the Housing Department of Housing and Community Development at the state. We've been working with them. We've had several meetings with them to let them know our progress and let them know we're making a good faith effort to get that housing element finished. They have an initial 90 days review period, and they tend to take all 90 days to provide comments to the city. So we'll have kind of a lull period on the housing element while we're awaiting that review period. Then they'll provide comments to us, we'll make revisions, and then they get another 60-day review period. And hopefully give us the blessing that it meets all of the requirements per state law. And they'll provide that direction at that time. So we still have another 6-month process for the housing element to get through the process. Additionally, we are working with the PlaceWorks team on the downtown specific plan. We received a draft downtown specific plan about a month and a half ago, and we've been going through that and reviewing that. We've provided our comments to the PlaceWorks team, and they're currently going through those revisions on that plan as well. We anticipate that within a couple weeks as well. We'll do another quick review, make sure it's okay, and then we will be releasing that for public review, as well as coordinating the next downtown advisory committee meeting. So hopefully within a month or two, we'll see that as well. In addition, they're also beginning the environmental impact report process for the downtown specific plan and the general plan. So technical studies are being completed for those two concurrent EIRs. There's also I believe it was in January, we presented to City Council an initial draft of the truck route study. The truck route study is also going through revisions with the sub-consultant of the PlaceWorks team. And, we're looking for, we're awaiting this land use plan that we're talking about today before providing solid comments on the truck route study, because they have to align with each other. Just like the circulation discussion we were having earlier, the truck routes also have to align with where we're proposing to maintain those industrial areas and how trucks will access the freeways, because that's ultimately where they're going. The challenge with the truck route study is how do we accommodate existing industrial uses that may not be where we want industrial in the future, and how do we accommodate that on the truck route study? And so that's something we're wrestling with the consultant team. So that will also be going through its own process once we nail down this land use plan. Also, hazard mitigation plan has kicked off, and we're going through the process of identifying our man-made and natural disaster or hazard areas and identifying risk areas and working with multiple divisions and departments of the city, police and county fire and public works, all providing input into that process. And planning is a part of that. So as I said, there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of, this is kind of a critical time right now. All of these pieces are kind of aligning right now, and as I mentioned, it's pretty much Travis and I reviewing all of these documents and trying to play a shell game with keeping everything moving and showing progress on this effort.
Just a quick editorial comment. I don't know how many cities I've worked in. This city, the work that Dave and Travis are doing is incredible. I would never accept this job, personally, et cetera. They've got a tremendous amount on their plate in terms of work. So I want to compliment them just publicly here for the work that they are doing, the fact that they are able to make progress on what they are doing. I'll just say in reference, just completed a general plan in another city of 35,000 people that have a larger staff in planning than this city does. So I just want to compliment what Dave, and sometimes it's easy to hear from others about delays and problems of getting things done and accomplished. What I see here and observe, having worked in a number from very large to very small cities, is they're doing an extraordinary job, and you should be proud of them.
Well, with that, I just have a comment real quickly. Dave, you mentioned you're a city planner, right?
I'm the city planner.
Oh, the city planner. You mentioned the city planner. Now, normally, just since the chairman mentioned about informing the mayor, the city planner doesn't directly inform the mayor. You go through a chain of command, right? So I presume you're going to go through your director. The director will then go to the city manager.
So
the city manager will then go ahead and schedule this for a study session with the city council and the planning commission to inform the mayor, right?
Well, we have an informal meeting with the mayor next week, and the director will be part of that meeting.
Okay.
And we can have that conversation. Certainly, yeah, we can't provide a direct recommendation to the mayor, but we can have a conversation with the mayor and let her know about, the chair's desire. And I don't think that's an unreasonable ask to let her know that we have this land use plan that's available. We're looking for public input. Any assistance we can get is appreciated.
In an informal setting, that information is passed in an informal setting. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Having worked in this field, I know how that process works, so I understand that clearly. So I just want to make sure that I understood that.
Yeah, and the city manager is aware that we're meeting with the mayor too.
Okay.
So.
Given the fact that there's a short staff here, so appreciate that. Thank you.
So I actually work right around the corner, and I noticed that the Carousel Mall is, there's a fence around it. Is there any work going around, or what's the plan with that? Why is it boarded up right now?
Yeah, so that's a city-owned property, and except for the couple historic buildings that front on East Street here. But the majority of the mall property, city-owned. Currently, the Public Works Department has a contract with the demolition company. The demolition of the mall was approved by City Council. I believe that was December or January. And that is now just starting, as you mentioned, there's fencing around the mall property. They're beginning, from my understanding, they're beginning the abatement process. That means they're going and getting rid of any asbestos material first. And then they will essentially begin the demolition from the inside out. So you won't see like a big wrecking ball come through and demo them all on an exciting day or anything like that. It's going to be, no explosions or anything like that. It's going to be a meticulous process to basically dismantle them all from the inside out.
I guess that's it. And our next regular meeting of the General Plan Advisory Committee will be held on April 3rd at 6 p.m. in the boardroom located at this address. And with that, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you. Thank you all.